Brother lifted his glass, tipped it toward me across the long table, and told a backyard full of his investors that I was the one our family kept around as a cautionary tale. Every family needs one, he said, grinning. Someone to point at when the kids ask what happens if you don't try hard enough. The laughter came fast and easy. Forks paused. Somebody at the far end actually clapped. The way you clap at a roast when you're a little drunk and want the speaker to know you're on his side. My sister-in-law laughed into her wine. And my mother, sitting at his right hand, the way she always sat, like a queen mother beside the only heir that counted. My mother smiled. Not a flinch, not a wince. A warm, satisfied little smile, the kind you give when somebody finally says the thing you've been too polite to say yourself. I didn't laugh. I also didn't look away, didn't fuss with my napkin, didn't do any of the small, flustered things a person does when they've been put in their place in front of a crowd. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 31 that October, the younger of two, the quiet one, the daughter my mother described to her bridge friends as still finding her footing. For most of my adult life, I had let them believe whatever was easiest. It cost less than the truth. We were at my brother's new house in Oakville, a big brick thing backing onto a ravine, for Thanksgiving. He bought it that summer and hadn't stopped talking about it since. There was a tent over the patio because the October air had teeth. 2 propane heaters glowing orange in the corners, string lights looped through the railing of the deck, the smell of turkey and butter tarts, his biggest clients out there mingling with our aunts. It was supposed to be his night, his house, his table, his success on display. That was exactly why he said it. Because making me the punchline was, by then, a family tradition. A reliable bit. Wren's between things again. Wren never could stick with anything. Wren doesn't do well under pressure. That one was my mother's favorite, delivered with a sympathetic tilt of the head, as if my entire life were a delicate condition she'd learned to manage. And I let them. For years I let them, because correcting them was more expensive than swallowing it. But here's the thing my brother didn't notice when the table laughed. One of his guests didn't. There was a man near the drinks table. Older, silver at the temples, in a charcoal suit that fit him too well for a backyard dinner. He'd been introduced to me earlier only as someone from one of the bigger accounts, and I'd smiled and shaken his hand and moved on because that was the role I played at these things, the dim, agreeable sister. But when the laughter went up, he didn't join it. He had gone very still, his glass halfway to his mouth, and he was looking at me, not with pity. People look at me with pity all the time at these dinners. I know the shape of it. This was different. This was recognition. The look of a man checking a face against a memory and finding it matches. My brother kept rolling. He had an audience, and he loved an audience more than he loved almost anything. I mean it, though, he said, warming up, waving the glass in my direction. Some people are just built to coast. No shame in it. Somebody's got to. The man in the charcoal suit set his drink down on the table, slowly, deliberately. And he began to stand. A small hush moved across the deck, the kind that happens when the body senses a shift before the mind catches up. My brother felt it. His grin held, but his eyes flicked sideways, trying to read the room he thought he owned. I want to tell you I'd planned this. I hadn't. Not this exact moment. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't ready for something like it. Because some debts compound quietly for years, and I had been carrying a very large one, and you can only carry it so long before it starts to feel less like a weight, and more like a key. To understand the dinner, you have to understand the years before it, and the years before it all pointed in one direction. My brother was the sun our family orbited. From the time he was small, he had what my mother called presence. He walked into a room and people turned. He was the one teachers forgave, the one relatives bragged about at weddings, the one whose every stumble got reframed into something noble. When he flunked a year of business school, it was, he's a big picture thinker. School could never hold him. When he got fired from his first real job, it was, they didn't deserve him anyway. When I, 3 years younger, came home with a scholarship to study finance, my mother told the neighbors I was doing some courses, like community pottery. I learned early that there were two ledgers in our house, and they used different math. His failures were tuition. My successes were luck. After a while, I stopped submitting entries to either one. It was quieter that way. After university, I went to work at a private investment firm in Toronto called Northcliffe Capital. I won't dress it up. It's the unglamorous engine room of the economy. The kind of place that buys controlling stakes in mid-sized companies that are stronger than they look or sicker than they admit, and then fixes them or sells them, or sometimes, when the people running them have made a mess of something good, takes the wheel. I was good at it. Not loud good. The kind of good where you read the footnotes nobody else reads, and you're right about what you find. I started as an analyst. I worked the kind of hours that turn your apartment in a place you mostly sleep. I got promoted, then promoted again, and somewhere in my late 20s I was running deals. Real ones. The kind with hundreds of jobs hanging off them and pension money behind them. By 30 I was a managing director. We don't put our deals on LinkedIn. Half of what I touched was bound up in confidentiality agreements thick enough to stop a door. I'd signed my name to silence so many times that silence became a habit, then a personality. I came to prefer peace over applause. It seemed like a fair trade. My family thought I was an administrative assistant who'd been let go a few times. My mother told people I worked downtown in an office. Technically true. The office had my name on a deal sheet that moved a couple $100 million a year. But she didn't know that, and I didn't tell her. And there was a kind of safety in the gap. As long as they underestimated me, they left me alone. Being underestimated, I decided, was a sort of camouflage. You'd be surprised how much you can get done from inside it. My brother started a logistics company a few years out of school. Warehousing, freight, last-mile delivery, the kind of business that printed money during the pandemic when everyone in the country was ordering everything to their door. He called it Northgate Freight. He was good at the part of business that involves a good handshake and a confident voice in a boardroom. He was not good at the part that involves balance sheets, covenanters, and the patience to read the footnotes. Nobody reads. That last part is going to matter. For years, at every dinner, every barbecue, every Thanksgiving and Easter and birthday, my brother teased, and my mother nodded along, and I smiled politely and passed the potatoes. It was the family's resting state. I told myself it didn't touch me anymore. Mostly I believed it. That night, watching the man in the charcoal suit watch me, I felt the old habit of smallness start to lift off my shoulders like a coat I'd forgotten I was still wearing. Because here is what none of them knew, and what I'd known for exactly 11 days. Northgate Freight had spent the last 2 years over-leveraged and overconfident. My brother had borrowed hard to buy trucks and warehouse space during the boom, betting the volumes would hold. They didn't. When the numbers turned, his bank got nervous and sold its position, the way banks do, quietly, to someone with a stronger stomach and a longer horizon. That someone was a fund. The fund was Northcliffe. And 11 days before that Thanksgiving dinner, the deal had landed on my desk, because distressed Ontario logistics was my coverage area, and I had opened the file and read the name of the company my brother had been bragging about for years. My brother did not know who held the paper on his company. He had never once thought to ask what his quiet, coasting little sister did downtown. The man in the charcoal suit knew exactly what I did, because 3 years earlier I had been the person who decided not to liquidate his family's company, a third-generation cabinet manufacturer up near Barrie, 212 jobs in a town that didn't have many other jobs to give. Everyone in the model said, "Let it die." I read the footnotes. I found the bones of a good business buried under one bad CFO, and I argued for 18 months to save it, and I won. And the man whose father had built that company never forgot the name of the woman from Toronto who'd flown up in a snowstorm to walk the floor and shake the hands of people the spreadsheets had already written off. His name was Harold Ainsworth, and apparently this fall, he'd become one of my brother's biggest clients. He stood up in that backyard, adjusted one cuff, and the table went quiet on its own. "Forgive me," Harold said in the unhurried voice of a man who has nothing left to prove to anyone. "Before we go on, I'd like to ask your sister something, if that's all right." My brother blinked. The grin was still there, but it had gone uncertain at the edges. Yeah, sure, Harold. Go for it." Harold turned. Just enough that the whole table could see his face, and he looked at me the way you look at someone you respect. "You're Wren Calloway," he said. It wasn't a question. "Managing director at Northcliffe Capital." The backyard didn't gasp. The backyard didn't gasp. It was worse than a gasp. It went silent the way a room goes silent when a sound you didn't notice suddenly stops. That pressure change quiet, the one you feel in your ears. My mother's smile froze on her face like something painted there. My brother's expression did the most extraordinary thing. It drained. I watched the color leave him in real time, from the top down, like someone had pulled a plug. "I'm sorry," my sister-in-law said, looking between us, laughing nervously. "Wren works at, she does admin, doesn't she? Reception?" Harold tilted his head, not unkindly. "She runs a deal book that would make most of the men at this table dizzy." He looked back at my brother. "Northcliffe holds the senior debt on Northgate Freight. Bought it from your bank in September. As of last week, after the restructuring, they hold the controlling equity." A pause, which I assumed was why you'd invited me, to meet the people who actually own the company you've been pitching me all evening. He gestured gently at me. "I've been having a lovely chat with the person who signs off on all of it." Somewhere down the table a fork dropped onto a plate, and the sound was enormous. My mother turned to me. She said my name, Wren, in a small, strange voice, half question and half plea, like a word she desperately wanted to take back and rephrase. My brother opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For maybe the first time in his entire life, my brother had nothing to say. I stood up, and that, after 31 years of being the family's cautionary tale, is when the actual humiliation began. Just not mine. For a moment I didn't speak. I let the silence do its work. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, but my hands, when I set my napkin down on the table, were steady. That surprised me. I'd imagined a moment like this, maybe 100 times over the years, driving home from these dinners, lying awake, standing in the shower letting the water go cold. And in every version of the fantasy I was shaking with rage, finally saying the thing. I'd never once pictured it happening under string lights, with the smell of turkey still in the air and a half-eaten buttered tart on my plate. "I didn't hide anything," I said. My voice came out lower and calmer than I expected. "I just never announced it. There's a difference." My brother swallowed. "Wren, why didn't you tell us?" I noticed the word. Us. Suddenly we were a unit. Suddenly I was part of the family ledger again, the moment the family needed something from me. I looked at my mother. She couldn't hold my eyes. She looked at her plate, at her wine, at the propane heater glowing in the corner, anywhere but at me. And that, I'll be honest, hurt more than anything my brother had ever said. He'd been cruel for years. Cruelty from him was weather. I'd learned to dress for it. But my mother's silence in that moment, the way she physically could not look at the daughter she'd let be the joke, that was the thing that landed somewhere deep and old. "I signed confidentiality agreements," I said. "That's the real answer. But also, I let it sit a second. Nobody ever asked. Not once. In 10 years, not one of you ever asked me what I actually did all day. It was easier to decide." Harold very gently took a step back from the table, the way a person steps back to give someone the floor. I was grateful for it. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said, and I meant it, even though embarrassment was already pooling on every face at that table. "I came for Thanksgiving. I came because you're my family and that still means something to me, even when it shouldn't." I looked at my brother. "But I'm going to set a boundary tonight. and I need you to actually hear it because I don't think you ever have." My brother gave a weak laugh, reaching for the old register, the charming one that had always gotten him out of everything. "Okay, okay. Let's not turn dinner into a thing, eh? We're family. It was a joke." I smiled at him. Calm, almost kind. "It's already a thing," I said. "It's been a thing for years. You just got to be the only one allowed to name it." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't reach for it. I let it buzz again. My brother's eyes dropped to my pocket, then snapped back to my face, and for the first time I saw real fear move behind them. Not embarrassment. Fear. The specific animal fear of a man who has suddenly understood that the ground he's been standing on belongs to someone else. "What's that?" he asked too fast. "Who's calling you?" I stepped away from the table and answered it. It was the office. The Covenant Committee had met that afternoon. They needed my sign-off to move on the Northgate file Monday. I'd known the call was coming. I just hadn't known it would land in the middle of my brother's Thanksgiving, in the middle of his backyard, in the middle of the worst night of his professional life. "Yes," I said quietly into the phone, turning slightly away from the table, though I knew every person there was straining to hear. "I've reviewed it. You have my approval. Send the package Monday morning." I hung up. When I turned around, Harold Ainsworth let out a slow breath, like a man who'd been holding it for longer than the call. My brother had risen halfway out of his chair. "Approval for what?" "The restructuring," I said. "Effective Monday." The words landed flat and heavy in the cold air. His voice climbed. "You can't. Wren, this is my company. I built it. You can't just—" "I'm not doing anything to your company," I said. "I'm doing my job at the firm that owns it. There's a difference, and I think it's important you understand it, because I don't think you ever understood the difference between something being yours and something being lent to you." I told him then, in the plainest language I could, what Monday would bring, that Northcliffe would be consolidating the trucking contracts he'd overpaid for, that the warehouse leases he'd signed at the top of the market would be renegotiated or broken, that every leadership role, including his, would be reviewed against actual performance instead of confidence. I didn't raise my voice. I've sat across from far more powerful and far angrier men than my brother, and learned that the calmer you stay, the louder the truth gets. "This is a bloodbath," he said. "You walking in here and gutting everything you did the gutting," I said. 2 years ago, when you bet the company on volumes that any analyst could have told you wouldn't hold. I'm just the one who's going to stop the bleeding. The difference is, I'm going to do it on purpose, and you did it by accident, and you did it while calling your sister a loser at dinner parties." My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped. "Wren. Sweetheart." The endearment. She hadn't called me sweetheart in years. "You don't have to do this. Not to your own brother. Family is family." I looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. At the face I'd spent my whole childhood trying to make proud, and my whole adulthood trying to stop needing. "I do have to do it," I said. "But not for the reason you think. This isn't punishment, Mom. The firm would do exactly this, no matter whose name was on the door. That's the whole point. That's what makes it fair. I'm not here to hurt him." I paused. "I'm here because I'm done shrinking myself so the rest of you feel comfortable. Those are two different things, and you've spent 30 years pretending they're the same." My brother's hands were shaking now. I'd never seen that before. He'd been the steady one, the confident one, the one who never sweated. And here he was, in front of his clients and his wife and the man he'd spent all evening trying to impress, coming apart at the seams of his own party. The dinner broke up the way dinners do when something has gone irreparably wrong. Too many people remembering somewhere else they suddenly needed to be. Coats appearing, half sentences of thanks. The clients didn't look at my brother on the way out. A couple of them looked at me, and one of them, a woman who'd run a manufacturing roll-up I'd admired from a distance, slipped me a card on the way past and said, "Low call me. Not about him. About you." I put it in my pocket. My brother followed me out to the driveway. The motion light snapped on. Our breath came in clouds. Wren, wait. His voice had dropped into something urgent and ugly. The charm gone, just need underneath. Come on. We're family. There it was again. That word. Family. When he needed mercy. Loser when he needed a laugh. He'd been swinging that word like a key all his life, locking me out and letting himself in, depending on what he wanted from me in the moment. You blindsided me, he said. In front of everyone. In front of Harold. Do you have any idea what you just... I stopped walking and turned to face him under the cold white light. No, I said. I didn't blindside you. You stood up in your own backyard and showed everyone exactly who you are, with no help from me. All I did was decline to cover for it. There's a difference. There's always been a difference, and you've spent your whole life on the wrong side of it. He dragged a hand through his hair. The panic was fully through now, breaking the surface. You're going to ruin me. I'm not ruining you, I said. I'm taking my hands off a wheel you never learned how to drive. The company has a chance now. A real one. It just won't have you steering it into the ditch again. Inside the house, through the kitchen window, I could see my mother. She had her hand over her mouth and her shoulders were moving, and I realized she was crying. There was a time, most of my life, honestly, when the sound of my mother crying would have undone me completely. I'd have walked back in. I'd have apologized for things that weren't mine to apologize for. I'd have made myself small enough to fit back into the shape they wanted, because keeping the peace had always been my job, the unpaid job I'd been assigned at birth. That night, it didn't undo me. I noticed it, the way you notice weather. And then I noticed that I could simply choose not to walk back in. You could have warned me, my brother said, and his voice cracked on it. And for a second, he sounded 8 years old. I met his eyes. You could have respected me, I said. Any year. Any single one of the last 20. You had 1,000 chances and you spent every one of them on a laugh. He had no answer for that. There wasn't one. Behind us, through the window, Harold Ainsworth was already on his phone, talking quietly, his face calm and final. Efficient. The grown-ups, I thought, were handling it now. I got in my car. My brother stood in the driveway in his nice host sweater, getting smaller in my mirror as I backed out. And I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. This had never really been about revenge. I hadn't engineered any of it. The bank sold the debt. The file landed on my desk. Harold happened to be a client. The truth happened to stand up. All I'd done, after 31 years, was decline to lie about who I was for one more evening. That was the whole act. Gravity does the rest, eventually, if you just stop holding things up that were always meant to fall. I drove back to the city with the heat on and the radio low, and I didn't cry, which I'd half expected to. I felt instead weirdly light, the way you feel when you finally put down a bag you've been carrying so long you'd stop noticing the weight. Monday morning, I sat in a glass conference room on the 31st floor, with the city spread out gray and bright below me. The Northgate package went out at 9,004. My brother wasn't on the call. His resignation came in at 9,051. Short, defensive. Signed with a title he no longer actually held. The interim CEO we'd lined up walks the floor that afternoon. The board accepted the resignation in under 4 minutes. Stability matters more than ego, especially to people whose pension money is riding on it. I voted with everyone else. Nobody on that call knew the man whose name was on the resignation letter was my brother, and I didn't tell them because it wasn't relevant to the decision and it wouldn't have changed a single thing. That was the part my family would never understand. It was fair because it wasn't personal. The personal part was just that I'd finally stopped lying about it. Around noon, my mother called. She didn't apologize. I want to be precise about that, because for a long time afterward people would ask me, gently, whether she'd at least said she was sorry, as if that would have tied it up. She didn't. What she said after a long silence was it worth it? I looked out at the traffic crawling on the streets 31 floors down. All those people moving forward without anyone's permission, getting on with their lives. I didn't do it to hurt him, Mom, I said. I keep telling you that and you keep not hearing it. I did it to stop disappearing. She was quiet for a while. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, gone smaller, almost wondering. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know that you were someone who could do all that. I closed my eyes. That, I said, was the whole problem. You never asked. And I let you not ask because it was easier. So it's on both of us, really. She didn't have anything to say to that either. We sat on the line in silence for a moment, two people who'd run out of the old script and didn't have a new one yet. Then she said she had to go, and I said okay, and we hung up, and it wasn't a reconciliation, but it wasn't a war anymore. And at 31, I was learning that sometimes that strange in-between is the most honest place two people can stand. The company survived. I want to say that because the version of the story where I ruined my brother is the version he tells, and it isn't true. Northgate Freight is leaner now, smaller, but it still exists, and so do the jobs. The man we put in charge knows how to read the footnotes. My brother got a severance that was more generous than he deserved, and less generous than he'd hoped, and he started over, the way people do, telling whoever will listen the story of how his ice-cold sister stabbed him in the back at Thanksgiving. People who don't know me believe him for about as long as it takes to meet me. The woman who slipped me her card in the driveway turned out to be exactly as sharp as she'd seemed. We work together now, on the other side. I left Northcliffe the next spring to run a smaller fund with her. One that does the kind of patient, unglamorous saving I'd argued for with Harold's Cabinet Company. 200 jobs at a time. Footnotes nobody else reads. It is the most satisfying work I've ever done, and almost nobody in my family understands what it is, which I've finally made peace with. Harold Ainsworth sends a card every Christmas. Just his signature and a single line, the same one every year, the Snowstorm Girl. I keep them in a drawer. We still do the family gatherings, most of them. My chair is still at the table, so is my brother's. But the laughter is different now, careful, a little watchful. The laughter of people who've learned that the quiet one at the end of the table was paying attention the whole time. Nobody calls me a name anymore. Not because they're afraid of me, though maybe a couple of them are. Because they finally know who I actually am. And you can't make a punchline out of a person once you've seen the whole of them. My mother and I are slow with each other now. Careful, like two people learning to walk on a leg that healed crooked. It's not what it was. It's not what I wish it could be. But she asks me about my work now. Every time. She doesn't always understand the answers, but she asks. And I've come to think that the asking was always the only thing I really wanted. Here's what I know that I didn't know at 31, standing in that cold backyard with a butter tart going stale on my plate. You can spend your whole life making yourself small so the people you love feel tall. You can mistake your own silence for kindness. And you can carry a thing so long you forget it was ever a weight, until the night you finally set it down, and the lightness afterward tells you the truth about everything you've been holding. I didn't get my power back that Thanksgiving. I'd had it all along. I just finally stopped apologizing for it. For most of my life, I believed that keeping quiet was the generous thing to do. I confused silence with kindness, and the two are not the same. When my brother called me the loser, our family kept around. He wasn't inventing a story that night. He was repeating one I had let everyone tell for 20 years because correcting it felt rude and exhausting. That's the part I had to sit with afterward. Nothing that happened in that backyard fell out of the sky. My brother bet his company on volumes that any careful person could have questioned, and he stopped being careful the day he decided charm was a substitute for doing the unglamorous reading. The bank got nervous. The debt moved. The truth simply stood up and adjusted its cuff. Cause then effect, the way it always works when you stop holding up the things that were built to fall. If I learned anything worth passing on, it's that 3 quiet things carried me, and not one of them was luck. The first was refusing to lie about who I was, even on a night when a lie would have kept the peace. Doing the fair thing instead of the convenient one is its own kind of backbone, and Harold Ainsworth remembered me for years, not because I was clever, but because I'd done right by 200 people a spreadsheet had already written off. The second was learning to actually see, to read the footnotes nobody reads, to notice the man in the charcoal suit going still before anyone else felt the room turn. Most people look. Very few pay attention. Paying attention is a skill you build on purpose, one careful page at a time. And the third was the long, plain stubbornness it took to keep building something real while my own family called it nothing. That kind of grit is unglamorous. It looks like showing up to a job you can't brag about, signing your name to silence, getting up the next day anyway. I don't tell people to go burn down their families. I tell them this instead. Be the person who does the decent thing when nobody's watching. Become the person who sees clearly when everyone else is laughing. And keep going long after the applause you wanted never comes. Those three things compound, quietly like a debt nobody else can see, until one ordinary evening they turn into a key. My mother asks about my work now. She doesn't always understand the answers, but she asks, and I've made my peace with how long it took. I didn't get my power back at that table. I'd had it the whole time. I just finally stopped apologizing for carrying it, and I stopped making myself small so the people I loved could feel tall. The lightness I felt driving home that night told me everything about the weight I'd been carrying, and everything about who I could finally afford to be.